Hello, Jen, and welcome to our
Hi.
small business stories, podcast and webinar.
hmm
Before we get started with the questions, would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Jennifer, Jennifer Wong, actually. And I am the small business owner of, well, actually, it's my husband and I. We opened our business together. It's called Wushu Unlimited, and we do martial arts and an after school program. And my background is in education. My husband's background is martial arts. And so this was the way we could kind of put them together.
Oh, that's such a perfect match.
Yeah, it worked out, actually. It really worked out. So we're very pleased to be working together.
Oh, that's so nice.
Mhm.
Okay. What inspired you to start Wushu Unlimited?
Okay. Well, let's see. My husband and I met that I was doing wushu. I was doing martial arts, and he was my coach. And
Oh, that's so
after
romantic.
I know, I kind of, yeah, I chased him 100%. So you know how that is. But as it started out, when we came here, when we first got to the US, we weren't really sure what we were doing. And, I was working my other job, and he was trying to figure out how he could fit into the kind of the US society. So, having a foreign degree doesn't really do very much here. And so we had a little bit of difficulty. He did some movie things and some stunt things and all that kind of stuff, performing a lot. And we just kind of taught, the random person here and there. So we ultimately, when my daughter was, let's see, she was like 1 year old, and he had just gone on this long performance. He'd been gone for a long time. And before he left, she couldn't talk. And when he came back, she was talking, and he's like, I am just missing too much of this. And so he's like, you know what? We'd always talked about starting the school, but we are always trying to get the capital to start up. And okay, let's do this a little longer and get some more capital saved. And then he's like, you know what? Let's just go for it. And so then he went to Jakarta to do his last performance. Actually, it was a 3-month stint, and I started looking for locations. And so while he was gone, I did all the business aspect of it, trying to do all the projections and all that kind of stuff, business plan, find a
All the heavy
location.
lifting.
Right. And then when he came back, we'd found a couple of places. One that we were really happy with, actually, but the zoning wasn't right. And so we were submitting a request with the city that we were in, that they would reconsider the zoning. And while we were waiting on that, I just kept looking for places. And then we found this place here, where we are now in Monrovia. And it just kind of all worked out, and all the kind of pieces fell into play. And we had originally talked about starting a school because, he was my coach. He's really great at teaching. And, that's something I didn't want to, not many people have his background. Not many people have his professional background and then actually can teach. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you can teach it. So
Absolutely.
he was an excellent coach. And so I'm like, well, we really need to kind of focus on that and make this happen. Because although he can, perform, can't perform forever, can't do stunts forever. Not everybody's Jackie Chan, right?
Mhm.
So we wanted to do something that was steady and stable. And he loves kids and he loves teaching. And so we really wanted to make this happen. And so then it all just kind of came into play. And then my background, like I said, is in education. Both my parents were teachers. My grandfather was, the headmaster of a private school, a local private school. So, I mean, I've grown up in education. I also have my teaching credential. And so I'm like, well, let's take advantage of this. We have people who they want to come and do martial arts, but they can't get their kids here because they have after school programs. I'm like, so let's just do that. I can take advantage of my background in education and tutor and help with homework and take care of these kids after school. And then they can still do the martial arts. And that way their parents know they have a safe place to be, their homework is done, and they've had a physical outlet. So it's really kind of adding balance to the whole equation for everybody. And so it just kind of seemed like the perfect blending of both of our kind of fortes. And so we put it together, and here we are.
Oh, that's such a sweet backstory. And how long have you guys been doing this?
Well, we started in the park in 2013. We got our location October 1st is when we first started classes, 2013. So we, in America, the Wushu community is very, very small. And because a lot of people don't know what Wushu is. They're like, what's that? I've never heard of it. I mean, it's most commonly known as Kung Fu. You say that and people are like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Mm-hmm. But Wushu, they just don't know this word. So then because the Wushu community is very small, the way most schools start out is you start teaching for someone else. And then you build up a student base, you leave, you take the students with you. Mm-hmm. And so that leaves the original school kind of high and dry. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted to promote Wushu for what it is without harming other Wushu schools. We're trying to bring it to as many people as possible, not just steal other people's students. Mm-hmm. So because of that, we started in the park. We went and we really got out of our comfort zone. I'm not very kind of outgoing when I first meet people. I'm very shy when I don't know people. But I went up to all these strangers. Would you like to try a free Wushu Kung Fu lesson in the park? Would you like to do this? And we did that for from April until September, every 2 times a week. We went to 2 different parks and we're giving away free martial arts lessons. And people look at you like you're crazy. Like, what, why are you doing this? But we wanted to really have a base when we opened. And so, but the difficulty with that was then when we opened, we couldn't just suddenly start charging these people that we had been giving free lessons to. Right. And so we went through the whole, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. Okay. You guys can still come to Wushu classes. You can come and perform for us anytime we do any kind of demonstration, and we won't charge you because you've been with us in the park. Because, it's kind of a marketing tool, to be honest, because if you go into a martial arts school and there's no kids there, nobody's there, you're going to be like, why am I going to give you my child? You don't have that atmosphere. So it was our solution to stealing students. Instead of stealing students, we're like, okay, well, we're just going to take these students and give them free martial arts lessons. And I mean, it really worked out because a lot of them were actually underprivileged youth. They wouldn't have been able to afford it. And so we were like, okay, well, let's do this, and so then we got it all together and they were able to continue. They went all the way through high school. Anytime we had a demo, they would come out and do it for us. Their parents were very helpful. They would clean the school. They would, so it really worked out, but it gave us that atmosphere, that kind of family atmosphere that we were really looking for. And so that's how we started. And then in October, when we opened the school for the first few months, they were our only students until some of our advertising really got going, word of mouth got working and the whole thing. And I think right now, actually our last student that was in that first bunch just is going to college this year. So they just left. So it's really kind of, full circle. And they're like, oh yeah, I felt encouraged to go to college and really, apply myself because you guys gave me so much confidence. And so it really worked out. And, we really are quite happy that, we really come full circle. It really, really felt like a family. So that was great.
That is so sweet. It sounds like you built this incredible asset for your community.
Well, that's kind of part of our goal. When I was a kid, I lived on a little kind of like a cul-de-sac. Mm-hmm. And so, I could run around and play all afternoon. My parents worked and I was a latchkey kid, but there were plenty of other parents that were at home. And so it's like, I remember I was roller skating one day and I fell and, cut my hand open on a sprinkler. And I just went to the nearest house. I didn't have to skate all the way home. And there was a mom in there who's like, oh my gosh, Jennifer. She knew who I was. She knew my parents' phone number, called them. She patched me up, took care of it, and took me home, And it's like, we used to have these communities that were, kind of defined by where you live. But right now, because there's so many people, so many families that need 2 people to work. And so kids are gone, they're in after school, they don't necessarily go to their local schools anymore. So we really lack community. So that's something that we try to build here. It's like I tell my parents in my after school program, I'm like, listen, my only real request is you put me on your emergency list for your kids. That way, if
Oh.
there's an earthquake or something happens, I can go get them. They're familiar with me. We pick them up every day. They can come and lie down on our sofa. With COVID, it's a little bit more tricky, but I still have in my office, I have a sofa. So if any child is not feeling well, I can come, bring them here, let them lie down on the sofa, isolate them from everyone else, and then wait till their parents come and pick them up, because it's lousy being sick at school, and you just want that comfort, and you want someone who's familiar to take care of you and bring you some
Mhm.
water. And so, we really try to do that. So that's why I always ask my parents, I'm like, please put me on your emergency list. That way, if something happens, I can go get them, and I would hate to have, like, I mean, heaven forbid, there's a lockdown or like an earthquake or any of these things. And then, I go get 6 out of 7 that I normally get, because the 7th one, they won't release them to me. And then I'd have to drive away with that kid looking at me like, why aren't you taking me? And that would just break my heart. There's no way I could do that. So, but it's, the whole purpose is to build this community and to, kind of have this closeness. I mean, yes, Chinese martial arts is important. Yes, the after school is important, but we also need each other. It takes a village,
Mhm.
and so I'm really glad that we can be a part of that.
I know, and you sound like the exact right person to build this sort of thing. You're so like kind and like warm-hearted.
Well, I like kids. I mean, my husband and I both love children. We only have one of our own, but in a way, all of the kids that are here are our kids as well, So it's great. It's really, to be able to have parents put their trust in you to actually help them raise their kid, look after their kid. It's very special. And so we feel very honored to be able to do that. And that's why we create these close bonds and do these kinds of things with all of our students. It's very
Mhm.
important to us.
And what would you say is your favorite part about running Wushu Unlimited?
Oh, definitely interacting with the students, interacting with the kids. I was just telling somebody the other day, at least every single child that's in my after school program will call me mom at some point.
Oh.
I mean, it's completely accidental sometimes. It's like, mom, oh, Miss Jennifer, But I mean, I pick them up every day after school. I'm the first person when they've had a bad day at school. I'm the first person they see and the first person they talk to. And so one time I had a little boy call me mom, and then he got embarrassed, and another little boy who was maybe 3 years older than he was like, well, that's kind of true. Miss Jennifer's like our wushu mom. I mean, she picks us up each day. She makes sure we do our homework, and she feeds us. And if something's wrong, we can tell her and she'll help us fix it. And so it was, it really made me feel, I didn't even have to be like, hey, it's okay. The other kids like kind of, like, yeah, that's kind of true. It's okay.
Yeah, she
And
is
so,
our mom.
so it's just great. And we haven't seen them that much because of the pandemic. And so specifically this year, when we're able to get back in person, and it's like when you pick them up, like I picked up yesterday for the first time, and their faces just light up. They're like, oh, hi, Mister. They come up, they hug you. And it's
Oh.
just, kids are just so loving, and it's so great. And to be able to help them get through their kind of, school troubles, not just academic, but everything in general, it's really a great feeling. We really care about these kids, and we can tell, that they really care about us. And there's nothing almost better, because the kids aren't going to love you because you're going to give them candy. I mean, well, some do, right? But if kids love you, they love you,
Mhm.
just for who you are, and just for your relationship. And so that's something that nobody can take away, and it's just really great. I really enjoy watching them learn, seeing them grow. They've all shot up like 3 or 4 inches. It's great. It's very fulfilling. So we really enjoyed that part of it.
Mhm. And it must have been so tough not seeing them for like a year.
Yeah, it was. We did do a pandemic pod, and we had 15 kids here doing their everyday schooling,
Mhm.
but and then we continued online classes. It's just not the same,
Mhm.
I mean, and so we've just reopened, and we just started our after school program this year, since the kids just started school again. And this is what it was supposed to be. It should be like this. This is what we're used to, everybody's comfortable with. So it was difficult not seeing them. And we did keep in touch, but we're all very happy to be back and up and running again.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so good to hear. And then we're gonna turn like a 180, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
ask, what's the hardest thing about running a small business?
Oh, okay. Well, it's like, how long do you have? For me personally, one of the hardest things is pricing, because we are a service oriented business. And like I said, I love hanging out with these kids, but we are a business, so, and it's hard for me because sometimes I feel like there are some families that maybe can't afford it, but I know they need it. And so then, I mean, for part of that reason, we have some scholarships and things like that, which help out. But, it's hard to place a value on a service, because I know what other after school places charge. I also know that at a lot of them, your kids are just a number.
Mm-hmm.
I also know that they don't have martial arts, or they don't have homework help, or they don't really care about your kids the way that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's hard. It's hard to put a price on that. But again, we are a business, and I have tons of overhead, 5,000 square feet here that I got to pay the rent on,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And so sometimes I kind of walk the line between, okay, can I charge just enough to make ends meet, but then, I've got to add value in my head. There not a lot of people can do what my husband does, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's a great instructor, and he really, I mean, he's a professional athlete, and he, is Chinese national champion. I mean, not a lot of people have, and then he went to college to learn how to teach this effectively. So, I don't, if he was to go out and find a regular job, right? Like, I mean, work for someone else and do this, then he would have a baseline salary, which he should earn.
Mm-hmm.
Professional coaches make a ton of money. But, I can't afford to pay him that. And so I have to, cut here and cut there and work out cash flow and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not a business major. I'm not. Like I said, I'm a teacher, and so sometimes it's hard to deal with all the little business details,
Mm-hmm.
pricing, marketing, cash flow, inventory, overhead, all this kind of stuff is very difficult. It's also hard to turn people away, when, if they can't afford it. I mean, that's, like I said, we do have scholarship programs, and but we're not state sponsored, so we don't get any money from the government for taking care of your children, and we don't get any subsidies or anything like that. So I do have to, I do have to draw the line. And this year specifically with COVID, we have definite limitations in terms of how many kids we can put in each class. And once we're full, we're full.
Mm-hmm.
I legally cannot take more kids. And so this year, when we started, this year actually is the first year that I have zero space even before school starts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to tell people, I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't have space for anybody. My priority is for people who need care every day of the week. I can't do a 3-day thing, and that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Having to turn people away and put them on a waiting list, that's difficult, so all those kind of little details, right, that go along with running a business are difficult. Marketing is hard, trying to keep everybody happy, and dealing with different personalities, all these kind of business things. A lot of people think that because we're a small business that we should, and it's just me who's running it, that I should give them a discount just because they want one, and I'm like, well, I know that it's Christmas break, and I know that you're not going to be here for a week, but I still have to pay rent and electricity and everything on the building, and so it's that kind of thing. And they're like, well, you're in charge, you can just change it. And I'm like, well, no, I can't, because then I'd have to do it for everybody. And so that's very difficult. I don't like to have to say no to people, and that's very tough. So I think, then you get, of course, all these different personalities, and we had to actually tell a parent that their child could not come anymore because they were too disruptive. And, they had some ADHD and some things like that, and the parents weren't willing to admit it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, listen, you need to get some help for your child. And that's hard as well, because
Mhm.
everybody wants to think their kid is perfect. I mean, I think my kid is perfect, right? She's not, right? She has an attitude, she thinks she's 13, even though she's 10. But, you know, I would love to think that she's perfect. It's just a lot of parents aren't willing to admit that their kids aren't, or that they need help, or that, and that's difficult. It's hard to be put in that position, so these are the kind of the things with the service business that come across when in a small business. I mean, you don't see anybody going to Ralph's to be like, hey, this grape is ugly or it's not sweet. Can you give me it for $2 less? I mean, they don't do that, Whereas, and I get requests for like getting a discount just for the sake of getting a discount. It's not that they don't have the money. It's not that they can't afford it. It's that they just want it cheaper.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I understand that it's a cultural thing sometimes. And sometimes it's just, they want to feel like they got a good deal, so, I mean, I could give them like $10 off and they'd be happy, but it's the principle of it. I was
Right.
just kind of like, well, if you really needed the money, then I would feel like, okay, let's find you a scholarship. I've got people who donate each year, who make donations to help underprivileged kids. Write me an essay on what Wushu means to you, or why your child wants to do Wushu. I want them to write down. They could be 6 years old and say, I want to do Wushu because it looks cool. And that would be sufficient. It's not about how great their grammar or their writing is. It's what it means to them. And will they appreciate the help that they're given? Because I mean, people do need help, they do need a hand up sometimes. But you can't just expect it.
Mhm.
And so it kind of goes along hand in hand with what we try to teach our after school kids. It's not just about getting your homework done as quickly as possible. It's about doing it well and really understanding it. We try to give them some of the moral values, and
Mhm.
not just like, oh, are you cheating and looking at the answers in the back of the book? That is not okay. I don't care that it's done. Do you know what you're doing? Okay. So we have things like that also that we try to go through, and that's a lot of teaching by example, that kind of thing. But so I mean, most of the problems with running a small business have to do with the financial aspects of things, and dealing with customers who think that because you're a small business, you should be able to make accommodations for them. That's kind of
Mhm.
tough. And being willing to stick to your guns and be like, no, this is the rule, no, this is the price, no, this is my limit for how full I am, etc., etc. That's probably the hardest part.
It does sound really tough. It sounds like you're doing like 7 jobs at once. You're a mediator, you're like
Sometimes
a
I feel that way.
therapist, you're like a negotiator, you're an accountant, and that's on top of like what you're actually doing.
I think all small business owners are, though. I mean, because at the end of the day, I'm not a 9 to 5. I'm not a punch a clock, and when I go home, I'm done.
Mhm.
It's like go home. I mean, my husband and I, we recently had to go pick up a weapon. Okay, so we do staff and spear, and so we had one of our students who had a growth spurt, and it was right before competition. And so the size of your weapon depends on your height. It
Mhm.
has to be a certain proportion. And so he'd outgrown his weapon. And so we wanted to order a new one for him, but they send us ones that were kind of low quality. And since the place that sells it is in San Francisco, my husband and I are like, all right, let's go.
That's so
And so we
far.
we drove up one night
Oh,
after work. We spent the night up that we drove after work. It was 8 o'clock. We drove up, checked into a hotel, got up the next morning and went to the warehouse and specifically picked, you know, good quality staves so that we can make a good quality spear so that he would do well in competition. And then we drove back and we got back in time for our evening classes.
mhm.
So, but the thing is that, I mean, one, we would only do that because it's our business, right? If it was 9 to 5, no way. And two, the whole way there, 6 hours there and back, we talked about, okay, how can we change our curriculum? How can we make this more user friendly? We want, there's a lot of kids who want to be on our team, but they aren't good enough. What do we do with them? How do we, because we're all about making them feel better, right? And we can't be like, oh, you're not good enough for team. But then we can't just let anybody on, because if we did, then it brings down the quality of team, and it makes it not as much of a, like one of those, it's not as much of a privilege to get on. So, so we go back and forth like, okay, yes, we are all about self-esteem and building these kids up, but in order to make it something to shoot for, it has to be something to shoot for.
Mhm.
you know. And so we discuss and we talk and we go back and forth about what can we do differently, how can we change things, what happened, how come this child is unhappy, why didn't they get their belt, what do we, you know. And so every single student, we talk about them and figure out what the best path is. Like, how can this child doesn't have the talent to go on team, but they're really passionate about wushu, so what do we do? Like, well, why don't we let them do traditional forms? Because that way they can come and perform with us every time. And there isn't as much emphasis on the technical skill. It's much more on how it looks, and it's performance art. And so, okay, let's steer them down that path, you know. And so we talk constantly. We're always discussing, always figuring out what our next move is. Do we want to get a bigger school because we have more students now? What are we going to do when COVID happens? Okay. And we're constantly reinventing the wheel. Mm-hmm. So it's, you know, but I'm very fortunate in that, you know, my husband and I can speak about these things, and I have someone who I can go over ideas with, and, you know, and he's willing to talk about it at all times, a little bit too much sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, can we just not talk about work today? Let's just, you know, go on vacation, go to the beach, you know. So but that is unique to small business. You know, before, when I worked in a 9 to 5, man, I was off the clock. Mm-hmm. I didn't think about my advertising stuff when I went home. I was like, nope, I'm done. What's for dinner? You know? So it's definitely, you know, unique to small businesses, but you kind of have to. And if you're not willing to put the time in, and you're not willing to do all these things, wear all these different hats, then, you know, you need to think whether or not this small business thing is really what you want to do.
And I have one last question for you, Jen.
Sure.
If you could go back in time and give some advice to your younger self right before you started your business, what would you tell her?
Oh, okay. Read your contracts carefully. Turn on your air conditioning when you first get the building, instead of waiting till June, finding out it doesn't work, and then you have to pay for it. Already been 6 months. No, seriously, that it, you know, just keep going. There's no problem that doesn't have a solution. And there'll be times when you're exhausted and it's frustrating and you're tired, but at the end of the day, it's worth it. It's worth it to, you know, do something you love and make a difference, you know, in whatever small way you can. You know, but yeah, just pay attention to the details, you know, try to, you know, especially when it comes to like licensing and accounting and all that kind of stuff, you know, like teach my husband that this is the business card and this is the regular card, our home card, you know, for the ATM cards. So he stops mixing them up the first year, you know, and stuff like that. But other than that, just, you know what, I would tell myself, you know, even with a global pandemic, you guys are still going to be here. Mm-hmm. And so just keep moving forward. And really, the other thing is, word of mouth is the best advertising that you could ever do. And almost all of those other things, no matter how much money they want, they're not worth it.
Mm-hmm. So, absolutely.
You know, so it's, you know, that's probably the lessons that I've learned. But yeah, just keep going, keep pushing.
Oh my goodness. Jenn, you've built something so like incredible. You've built like a community, and I'm so sure that it's going to inspire so many like aspiring like entrepreneurs like yourself.
Yeah, I hope so. I never really, back in the beginning, I had no idea if this was going to work. I mean, I never really thought about failure. Okay, let's put it that way. I was just like, I'm just going to do everything I can do. And if something doesn't work, you try something else. If something doesn't work, you try something else. The only failure is giving up, you know? And so I just kept pushing. But I also knew I wasn't a business person, you know? And, you know, all of those kinds of skills that it takes to run a business, you can learn along the way. Mm-hmm. You know, stick to what you know, do that well, and the rest will all come. So it's kind of, I guess that's my motto, you know, just keep going.
And it's such a good motto to have for someone who works in the martial arts space.
Right. It's like one punch at a time, you know. It's like the first day you're weak, you can't make a dent at all, and then soon you never know, you know, go after a few lessons, after a few months, and then you can take care of yourself. It builds confidence like nobody's business, knowing you can handle things. So that's great.
Well, thank you so much, Jenn, for taking the time to talk to me today.
Sure, of course. Of course.
And that's all the time we have. I don't want to take up any more of your time.
Yeah.
And thanks once again.